long before Hannibal crossed the Alps, long before tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died at Cannae. There was another war, and Rome had won it. The First Punic War, fought between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 241 BC, had transformed the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Carthage had been one of the wealthiest powers of the ancient world. Its ships dominated trade routes across the western Mediterranean. But after more than 20 years of brutal warfare, Rome emerged victorious. Carthage lost Sicily. It was forced to pay a massive indemnity. Soon afterward, Rome also seized Sardinia and Corsica, while Carthage was weakened by internal conflict. For many Carthaginians, the humiliation was impossible to forget. One of them was Hannibal Barca. Hamilcar had commanded Carthaginian forces during the final years of the First Punic War. He understood Rome. He had fought its armies. And according to the Roman historian Livy, Hamilcar passed his hostility toward Rome to his young son. That boy was Hannibal Barca. Ancient tradition tells us that when Hannibal was still a child, his father brought him before an altar and made him swear an oath that he would never be a friend of Rome. Whether the scene happened exactly as later writers described cannot be proven, but the story captured something very real. Hannibal would spend much of his life fighting the Roman Republic. After the war, Hamilcar began building a new Carthaginian power base in Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal. The region offered silver mines, soldiers, and enormous economic resources. Hannibal grew up around military camps. He learned how armies moved, how alliances were built, and how different peoples could be brought together under a single command. When Hamilcar died, command eventually passed to his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair. Then, in 221 BC, Hasdrubal was assassinated. The Carthaginian army chose Hannibal as its commander. He was still only in his 20s. Within a few years, he would become Rome's greatest enemy. The crisis began at Saguntum, a wealthy city on the eastern coast of Iberia with ties to Rome. In 219 BC, Hannibal besieged the city. After months of resistance, Saguntum fell. Rome demanded that Carthage surrender Hannibal. Carthage refused. The Second Punic War had begun. Rome expected the fighting to take place in Spain, Sicily, or perhaps North Africa. Hannibal had something completely different in mind. Instead of waiting for Roman armies to attack Carthaginian territory, he decided to invade Italy itself. The plan was extraordinary. Hannibal would lead a multinational army from Iberia, cross southern Gaul, pass over one of Europe's greatest natural barriers, and emerge on Rome's northern frontier. That barrier was the Alps. Thousands of soldiers would have to cross them. Cavalry would have to cross them. Supply animals would have to cross them. And among Hannibal's army were war elephants. Rome believed geography protected Italy from an invasion of this scale. Hannibal was about to prove otherwise. He was not preparing to defend Carthage from Rome. He was preparing to bring the war to Rome itself. In 218 BC, Hannibal began one of the most extraordinary military marches in ancient history. His destination was Italy, but between him and Rome stood rivers, hostile tribes, and the Alps. Hannibal first moved from Iberia across the Pyrenees and into southern Gaul. Even before reaching the Alps, the army was shrinking. Some soldiers were left behind to secure newly conquered territory. Others were unwilling to continue such a dangerous expedition. Still, Hannibal pushed forward. At the Rhone River, another obstacle appeared. Local forces threatened his crossing while the Romans were already moving to intercept him. Hannibal moved quickly. His troops crossed the river using boats, rafts, and other improvised methods. Ancient sources even describe extraordinary efforts to transport the army's war elephants across the water. The Roman commander Publius Cornelius Scipio arrived too late. Hannibal had disappeared north. That decision stunned the Romans. They expected him to remain near the Mediterranean coast. Instead, he was heading directly toward the mountains. The exact route Hannibal took across the Alps remains debated more than 2,000 years later, but the ancient accounts agree on the scale of the challenge. Narrow mountain paths, freezing temperatures, snow, rock slides, and attacks from hostile alpine tribes. Men slipped from mountain trails. Pack animals fell into ravines. Food became increasingly difficult to find. For soldiers raised beneath the Mediterranean sun, the mountains must have seemed like another world. According to Polybius, Hannibal encouraged his exhausted troops by showing them the plains of Italy from the heights. Below them lay the land they had come to conquer. But reaching it came at a terrible cost. Hannibal had begun his expedition from Iberia with a much larger force. By the time he descended into northern Italy, only a fraction remained. Ancient figures differ, but Polybius reports roughly 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry reaching Italy. Most importantly, Hannibal had made it, and so had some of his elephants. The Romans had believed the Alps formed a natural wall protecting northern Italy from a major invasion. Now a Carthaginian army was standing on the other side. Hannibal immediately began recruiting among the Gallic tribes of northern Italy, many of whom resented Roman expansion. His weakened army began growing again. Rome responded quickly. Legions were sent north to stop him before he could establish himself. The first major encounters came at the Ticinus and then the Trebia River. At Trebia, Hannibal demonstrated the tactical intelligence that would soon make his name legendary. In freezing winter conditions, he provoked the Roman army into crossing the icy river before battle. Cold, wet, and exhausted, the Romans attacked. Hannibal was waiting. His infantry held the front. Cavalry attacked the flanks. Then hidden Carthaginian troops emerged behind the Roman army. The result was devastating. A large Roman force was shattered. Hannibal had crossed mountains Rome believed could protect Italy. Now he had defeated a Roman army on Italian soil. But Trebia was only the beginning, because Hannibal was about to lure another Roman army into one of the deadliest ambushes in ancient history. After the disaster at the Trebia, Rome still believed Hannibal could be stopped. They were wrong. In 217 BC, Hannibal moved south through Italy. The Roman consul Gaius Flaminius followed him aggressively, determined to prevent further destruction. Hannibal understood exactly what Flaminius wanted: a battle. So he gave him one. Near Lake Trasimene, Hannibal concealed much of his army among the hills surrounding a narrow road beside the lake. The Romans marched directly into the trap. Then Hannibal attacked. Carthaginian forces descended from the hills while the lake blocked the Roman escape. Thousands were killed or captured. Flaminius himself died. It became one of the largest ambushes in military history. Rome was terrified. Instead of confronting Hannibal directly again, the Republic appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius adopted a frustrating strategy. Do not fight Hannibal. Follow him. Destroy supplies. Harass his army. And wait. The Romans later called him Cunctator, the delayer. His strategy worked. But politically, it was hated. Romans wanted victory. In 216 BC, they assembled one of the largest armies they had ever placed in the field. Their target was Hannibal. The two armies met near the small town of Cannae in southern Italy. Rome possessed an enormous numerical advantage. Hannibal possessed something more important: a plan. He placed his weaker infantry in the center, forming a line that curved toward the Romans. His strongest African infantry stood farther back on both sides. His cavalry occupied the wings. Then the Roman legions advanced. Hannibal's center slowly retreated. The Romans believed they were winning. They pushed deeper. More soldiers poured forward. Their formation became increasingly compressed. Then the trap closed. Hannibal's African infantry turned inward from both sides. His cavalry defeated the Roman horsemen, rode behind the legions, and attacked from the rear. The Roman army was surrounded completely. What followed became one of the most famous military disasters in history. Ancient sources disagree on the exact casualties, but tens of thousands of Roman and allied soldiers were killed. Among the dead were the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, numerous former officials, and much of Rome's political and military elite. An army designed to destroy Hannibal had nearly been annihilated. The consequences spread across Italy. Several important Roman allies began defecting. The powerful city of Capua joined Hannibal. Other communities followed. For perhaps the first time, Rome's alliance system appeared capable of collapsing. Panic spread through the Republic. Families waited for men who would never return. Rome had lost at Trebia. It had been humiliated at Trasimene. Now, it had suffered catastrophe at Cannae. Hannibal had destroyed Roman armies again and again. The road toward Rome appeared open. And this is where the greatest question of Hannibal's entire campaign begins. If Rome was wounded, if its greatest army had been destroyed, if its allies were beginning to abandon it, why didn't Hannibal march directly on Rome? After Cannae, Rome had suffered one of the worst defeats in its history. Tens of thousands of soldiers were dead. A consul had been killed. Important allies were beginning to defect. Hannibal had achieved what almost no enemy before him had accomplished. And yet, he did not march immediately on Rome. For centuries, historians have asked why. According to Livy, Hannibal's cavalry commander Maharbal urged him to move quickly against the city. When Hannibal hesitated, Maharbal supposedly replied, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use one." The conversation may have been shaped by later Roman storytelling, but the question behind it is real. Had Hannibal missed his greatest opportunity? The answer is more complicated than it appears. Hannibal had built an army designed to win battles in the open field. Rome was different. It was a heavily fortified city. Taking it would likely require siege equipment, enormous supplies, and potentially months of fighting. Hannibal had crossed into Italy without a massive siege train. Even after Cannae, his army had suffered losses of its own. More importantly, destroying Roman armies was never necessarily the same as destroying Rome. Hannibal's broader strategy appears to have been aimed at breaking the network of alliances that gave the Republic its strength. Rome depended on communities throughout Italy for soldiers, resources, and political support. If enough of those allies abandoned Rome, the Republic might be forced to negotiate. After Cannae, that strategy appeared to be working. Capua defected. Several communities in southern Italy changed sides. Later, Syracuse, and Macedon also became involved against Rome. But Hannibal faced a problem he had repeatedly underestimated. Rome refused to surrender. Instead of negotiating after Cannae, the Republic raised new armies. Younger men were recruited. Emergency measures were introduced. The surviving Roman leadership avoided another massive confrontation with Hannibal. The strategy associated with Fabius Maximus returned. Rome would deny Hannibal the decisive battle he wanted. While Hannibal moved through Italy, Roman forces attacked his allies, recovered territory, and slowly reduced his freedom of movement. There was another problem: Carthage. Hannibal needed reinforcements, money, equipment, and additional troops if he was going to sustain a long war deep inside enemy territory. Support did arrive at various points, but not on the overwhelming scale needed to break Rome. Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal Barca eventually attempted to bring another army from Iberia into Italy. If the brothers could unite, Rome might face disaster. But in 207 BC, Hasdrubal was intercepted at the Battle of the Metaurus. His army was destroyed. Hasdrubal was killed. According to ancient accounts, his severed head was later thrown into Hannibal's camp. The message could not have been clearer. The reinforcements Hannibal desperately needed were never coming. Years passed. Hannibal remained undefeated in many major encounters. But Rome was learning how to fight him. It stopped trying to destroy the man, and began destroying everything that allowed him to remain in Italy. Then a young Roman commander emerged with a different plan. Instead of chasing Hannibal, he would attack the source of his power. His name was Scipio, and he was preparing to take the war to Africa. For more than a decade, Hannibal had fought inside Italy. He had crossed the Alps, destroyed Roman armies, killed consuls, and inflicted at Cannae one of the greatest defeats Rome would ever suffer. But Rome was still standing, and now it was coming for Carthage. The man who changed the course of the war was Publius Cornelius Scipio. Instead of continuing to chase Hannibal across Italy, Scipio attacked Carthaginian power elsewhere. Roman forces had already broken much of Carthage's position in Iberia. Scipio now proposed something even more dangerous: invade North Africa. The strategy worked. In 204 BC, Scipio landed in Africa and joined forces with the Numidian prince Massinissa, whose cavalry would become crucial to Rome's success. Carthage suddenly faced war on its own territory. The leaders who had allowed Hannibal to fight in Italy for years were forced to make a desperate decision. They recalled him. After roughly 15 years campaigning on Italian soil, Hannibal finally left. He had entered Italy as a young commander determined to break Rome. He departed without achieving the victory that had once seemed so close. The final confrontation came in 202 BC, near Zama. This time, Hannibal faced a Roman commander who had studied his methods. Hannibal deployed war elephants at the front of his army. Behind them stood his infantry. Scipio prepared his legions differently. He arranged lanes through the Roman formation, allowing many of the charging elephants to pass through rather than smash directly into tightly packed soldiers. Roman and Numidian cavalry then drove Hannibal's horsemen from the battlefield. The infantry battle remained fierce. But eventually, the cavalry returned. This time, Hannibal experienced something painfully familiar. Roman cavalry attacked his army from behind. The tactic that had helped Hannibal destroy Rome at Cannae now helped Rome destroy Hannibal at Zama. Carthage was defeated. The Second Punic War was over. The peace terms were severe. Carthage lost its overseas empire, surrendered most of its warships, and was forced to pay a massive indemnity. Hannibal survived. He later entered Carthaginian politics and attempted reforms, but Roman pressure eventually forced him into exile. He traveled through the eastern Mediterranean, advising rulers who opposed Rome. Even years after Zama, Rome still considered him dangerous. Eventually, Roman demands followed him to Bithynia in Asia Minor. Facing the possibility of capture, Hannibal died around 183 BC, traditionally believed to have taken poison rather than surrender to Rome. The man who had terrified the Republic was gone. So, how close did Hannibal come to destroying Rome? Closer than almost any enemy of his age. After Cannae, Rome had lost an enormous army. Important allies defected. Its political elite had suffered devastating casualties. And Hannibal remained inside Italy. But he never destroyed the foundation of Roman power. Rome could replace soldiers. It could raise new legions. It could rely on a vast alliance network. Most importantly, it refused to surrender. Hannibal could defeat Roman armies. What he could not defeat was Rome's ability to survive defeat. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of his story. Hannibal entered Italy hoping to destroy Roman power. Instead, the war ultimately helped create an even stronger Rome. Within decades, Carthage itself would be destroyed. Rome would dominate the western Mediterranean. And Hannibal, the man who came closer than almost anyone to stopping that rise, would become immortal as Rome's greatest enemy. Rome defeated Hannibal. But Rome never forgot him.